Hey, welcome back everyone, and as you can see it's a very windy day up in the Black Hills and it's very hot too. It's pushing 100 Fahrenheit, 37, 38 Celsius, so it's warm. I really wanted to cook out on the fireplace today, but it's really not very smart to light an open fire up here when we got high winds and high heat. So what can we do? Well, I thought, I've been saving this up for a while. These are my two sourdough starters. One's called Dormant and one's called Hagrid. We just thought it would be fun to give them a name. And I've deliberately not fed these for about 2.5 months. And I've done that because I want to sort of prove a point actually. You don't have to feed these every day. So I'm going to get in out of this wind and heat, and we'll delve in a little bit closer into these sourdough starters, and we're going to mix these up. We're going to feed them, and I'm going to make some bread with them tomorrow, and we'll just see how well they turn out. After 2.5 months, they've just been in the fridge, the leftovers from my last batch of bacon. I'll be back in a bit. Okay, that's better. Back inside the air conditioning. I don't know how we lived without air conditioning in the United States years ago, but so let's have a closer look at what we've got going on. So Dermot, he is my whole wheat sourdough starter, and Hagrid is just a white, it's not a bleached flour, but it's not a whole wheat flour. It's actually from our neighbors to the north. It's a North Dakota flour. It's got some funk going on, but it doesn't smell terribly unpleasant. Dormant, on the other hand, smells like a really, really smelly French cheese, like a Vacherin or a Pont l'Evêque or something like that, if you're familiar with those really stinky, soft French cream cheeses. But we're going to mix them up. We're going to give them some fresh flour and some water and see if they'll take off. The point is, you don't have to start over, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. Okay then, turn your scale on, put your starter on there, and then just tare it so it takes it back to 0. There you go, 0. This is the white flour, so I can go out my nice North Dakota local flour. And I'm going to put 100 grams of flour in there. Okay. Now, depending on how much bread you make, depends on how much starter you want to make. And next, we're going to add 100 grams of water. There you go, close enough. And we're going to blend those together. And one of the best things I've found to be doing this with is a fondue fork. It works absolutely brilliant. All right, same routine with the other one then. So we'll put that on the scale, 0 it out. And now we're going to use, this is just, I don't use anything fancy. I mean, this is supermarket whole wheat flour. Let's see if we can make a nice mess while we're at it. We'll stick 100 grams of that in. And I will add more water to this than just the 100, because as this is a whole wheat flour, it absorbs a lot more of the moisture. So we'll first start off with 100, a little bit over there, mix this up and just see how it looks. And you'll notice with whole wheat it really soaks up the water. Now I've seen some people, when they mix their sourdough starters up with whole wheat, they actually have a pretty dry mix. I've always made mine a little bit wetter. It's always worked for me, but that does not mean it's the only way to do it. Like a lot of this baking stuff, it's based on your own experience. Of course, different altitudes and temperatures, things are going to change. So you can see it's not super sticky, not super dry. We'll just clean the sides down on there. Pop the lid on it just loose. You don't want to do it tight because you're going to start making carbon dioxide. So what if you don't have your own sourdough starter? You might have had somebody give you one that you can start growing, but if you don't have anything, how are you going to start from scratch? Well, as you probably realise, there's a bazillion videos out there telling you how to do it. There's merits to all of them. There's not a right way or a wrong way, but there's certainly a complicated way and an easy way. I'm going to show you my way, which I think is pretty easy. The first thing you want to do is pick a jar that has a lid that will screw on. It doesn't have to be tight, just that it'll fit loosely. And weigh your empty, dry jar. Just stick it on the scale, weigh it, and write that on the top of your cover, on your jam jar. Because that's got to be important. Whenever you want to figure out how much you've got left in your jar, if you didn't weigh your jar first, you won't know how much you got in there. So there's two things that we're aiming for when we make a starter. We want to encourage the yeast organisms that are great at producing carbon dioxide, but are also really tolerant to the lactic acid. Because what will happen is, as the lactic acid increases, as this water flour mix ages, it will make the mix inhospitable for the other yeasts and bacteria that are on the dry flour, in the air and everything else. It'll make it inhospitable for them to grow. But our yeasts that are responsible for raising our bread, they can tolerate that. So they become the predominant strain of yeast in our sourdough mix. So it's important that we allow that to build up over a little bit of time, so we give that lactic acid a chance to build up, so we've got only the yeast that we really want. The added benefit, of course, and the reason it's called sourdough in the first place, is that lactic acid is what gives the sourdough that nice sour tang. So to start off doing this then, I would recommend that you use a whole wheat flour, because as far as the yeast are concerned, it's a lot more nutritious and it generally goes a lot better to start with. So I'm going to add 25 grams of flour. And to that, we're going to add 25 grams of water. So that will bring that up to 50. So you're just going to stir that up. Pop a lid on it. And that is it. That's all you got to do. Now tomorrow, we'll do exactly the same thing. Put it back on the scale, zero the scale out, 25 grams of flour, 25 grams of water. You probably won't see anything going on in the first day, but day 2, day 3, as this starts to come up the side of the jar, kind of wipe the sides down, it makes it easier to see it. You'll start to see little bubbles appearing. And keep going, and by the time you've done this for 4 or 5 days, it should be going along just fine. So it's been 2 hours now since we put our 2.5-month-old unfed starter and refed it, and you can see already, if you'll excuse the handheld shakiness here. This was our white flour. See the bubbles on the top already? If you look around the sides of the jar, you can see bubbles forming as well. So this is well and truly alive, and this would not happen with just plain flour. This is the yeast that was dormant. We reactivated it with moisture and nourishment, and away it goes. Now on the Whole wheat, you can see there's a couple of bubbles there. In fact, I think there's one about to pop. I don't know if we'll see it. You can see it there. And if we look at the side of the jar, you can see bubbles forming there, you see. By tomorrow morning, this will be well energized and doing its thing. The new starter that we've just started, don't expect to see much of anything in a couple of hours on this, even though it's really warm in the house. With the new starter, of course, we could have all kinds of different strains of yeast creating that carbon dioxide in there, because at the moment the lactic acid levels are really, really low. So we'll feed that again tomorrow with another 25 grams of flour and water, and then we'll start to see it really take off. So we'll see you all back again here tomorrow morning, and we can probably make some bread. And welcome back. It's been about 24 hours since we replenished our old 2.5 month starter that has been in the fridge without any food, no water, just been sitting there dormant in the fridge. The whole wheat one has actually risen all the way up to the top of the jar, and now it's just dropping a little bit, which is the perfect time to be adding it to our dough to make our bread. The North Dakota white flour, it just came all the way up to the top of this jar, and it's super frothy, and it smells actually really quite nice. It's sort of fruity and slightly acidic. Here's our little starter that we've started from scratch with our 25 grams of water, 25 grams of whole wheat flour. It still smells sort of wheaty, bready, doesn't have that tang yet, which you wouldn't expect because there's not enough lactic acid in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to make bread with these two, and we're going to refeed this one with another 25 grams of whole wheat flour and water. So let's go ahead, we can do that actually right now. So pop it on your scale. I actually had to put these in the fridge. I don't know if you remember earlier in the video, I said after 2 hours they were already starting to bubble. And 2 hours after that, they were really coming up fast. So I actually popped them in the fridge overnight, just to slow them up a little bit. So we'll add 25 grams of water, or thereabouts, he says, splashing it everywhere. Give this a mix up. So let's have a close-up shot of our new sourdough starter. That's the one that we're starting. Here's that North Dakota white flour. I've got to use this because it's actually starting to come over the top, which is pretty cool. And the whole wheat one, as I mentioned earlier, it did actually come up to the top here, and now it's dropped down, and that's actually your optimum time to add it to your dough. So getting back to this one briefly, we just added another 25 grams of flour and water, stirred it all up, scraped down the sides of the jar so that we can see through it, and now we put a band on it because we've got a little bit of depth in there. And tomorrow we will do exactly the same thing. Hey, morning guys! It's time for the third feeding of our new starter. Now it's starting to smell like a starter. It's got that slight whiff of acetone, I guess is what I would say. Once you've done this a few times, you really don't have to measure this. So that's all there is to feeding your starter. Every day, and it doesn't have to be at the same time of the day at all. Whenever it's convenient, just give it 25 grams of water, 25 grams of flour. So you may be wondering what happened to the sourdough starters that I did use yesterday to make the bread that I'm baking this morning. That is what's left of what we used for our baking this morning. And as you can see, there's not really very much in there. There's probably about 2 teaspoons worth of sourdough starter in the bottom of the jar and what's on the sides. You've got to remember that these yeast organisms are microscopic. And so even though it looks like you've cleaned down the side of the jar, there are literally millions of them inside this jar, which is what's going to get the thing going again when we add some more flour and water when we next need it. So it's the morning of day 5. After I fed the sourdough starter yesterday, it just went crazy. It went all the way up to the jar, I guess, overnight, and then dropped down again. I could see the smears on the side of the jar. So I just fed it, and I'm not joking, an hour ago. And you can see it is all the way up to the top. When I fed it an hour ago, I just put the elastic band at the top of the level, and there it goes. This is ready to make bread with. So this sort of answers the next question that you might have, is how do you know when your starter is ready? And it's really quite simple. When it's just making a load of bubbles like that and it reacts, really quickly, it's ready to make bread with. If you catch it a little bit early, it's not going to make any difference, because what you're doing when you're adding it to your dough is essentially you're feeding it again anyway. So even if your starter is not quite peaked, or it's peaked and then it's dropped, it really doesn't matter, because you're going to be adding it to a new nutrition source anyway, and it's just going to take off and do its thing. So let's have a quick look at the top of this, because it's actually pretty amazing. Bear in mind, I just fed this an hour ago, and you can see all the bubbles in it. So when it's doing this, you can use it. You don't have to faff around with this, taking a spoon of it out and dumping it in water to see if it floats. When you've got this many bubbles and this much activity in your sourdough starter, it is ready to use, and that's all you need to know. So that'll do it for this video. I know it's a little bit of a longer video this time, but I know there's a ton of questions about sourdough, and it's almost got this alchemistic quality about it. It's somewhat mysterious. It's certainly absolutely fascinating to see nature at work and helping us produce bread. So if you've enjoyed the video, of course, please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do. Hit that notification bell, and that way you'll get a notification the next time I post a video. And I will see you again real soon with another video. And I think we're going to do something we can cook either out on the barbecue grill or out on the fire. And that is a Tuscan recipe involving some supermarket sausages. Something really simple that you can elevate into something really very, very tasty. So until then, thank you everybody so much for watching, and we'll see you real soon. Cheers.